During Christmas, my husband's family insisted I cook, but didn't let me eat with them. The first time it happened, I thought it was a misunderstanding. "Elena, dear," my mother-in-law Margaret had said, her voice honeyed but her eyes sharp as knives. "In our family, it's tradition for the newest daughter-in-law to prepare the Christmas feast. It's quite the honor." I remember nodding eagerly, desperate to impress. Robert and I had only been married for 4 months, and this was my first Christmas with the Harrington family. Their sprawling Tudor-style home in Connecticut intimidated me almost as much as Margaret's perfectly coiffed silver hair and the way she examined my department store dress when I arrived. "Of course," I had replied, smoothing down my apron. "I'd be happy to." What Margaret failed to mention, what no one bothered to tell me, was that preparing the feast apparently also meant not joining the family to eat it. I still remember the confusion washing over me when everyone began settling around the elegant dining table I had spent hours setting. The fine china gleamed under the chandelier light. The centerpiece of holly and red candles, arranged according to Margaret's exact specifications, cast a warm glow across the polished mahogany. "Aren't you sitting down, Elena?" Robert's sister Charlotte had asked, a hint of something like amusement in her voice. Before I could answer, Margaret swept in from the kitchen. "Oh, Elena understands our ways," she said, patting my arm with her cold, bony hand. "The one who prepares the meal serves it first, then enjoys her own dinner afterward. It's how we honor the chef's hard work, giving her peace to enjoy her creation after everyone else has been tended to." I glanced at Robert, expecting him to say something. He was adjusting his napkin, avoiding my eyes. Is that how your family always does it?" I asked quietly. "Always," Margaret said firmly. "4 generations. My mother-in-law taught me, and now I pass it to you." I spent that first Christmas dinner walking back and forth between the kitchen and dining room, refilling water glasses, bringing out each course at precisely the right moment, and listening to the laughter and conversation from which I was excluded. By the time everyone had finished their slices of the bourbon pecan pie I'd spent hours perfecting, the food was cold, and I ate alone in the kitchen while washing dishes. That was 3 years ago. Every Christmas since has been the same ritual. Me cooking for days, serving a 12-person meal, and eating the leftovers alone while the family retires to the living room for gifts and mulled wine. I've never questioned it again, though the hollow feeling in my chest grows each year. "You're doing great, honey," Robert always says, coming into the kitchen briefly to kiss my cheek before rejoining his family. "Mom really appreciates how well you've embraced our traditions." I want to believe him. I need to. You see, I grew up in a small apartment above my parents' struggling Ukrainian restaurant in a forgotten corner of New Jersey. Christmas meant working alongside my parents, serving customers who couldn't be with their own families, then closing early to share a simple meal together. We didn't have fine china or family heirlooms, but we had each other. When I met Robert during my final year of culinary school, his world seemed like something from a storybook. His family had an actual coat of arms and summer homes. His mother hosted charity galas and had a personal shopper at Neiman Marcus. When he proposed, I couldn't believe someone like him would choose someone like me. "They'll love you," he promised. "Just be yourself." But from the moment I met Margaret Harrington, I understood that myself wasn't what she wanted. So I tried to become what she did want, the perfect daughter-in-law who knew her place and followed traditions without question. Every family has their customs, my own mother said when I called her that first Christmas night, trying not to cry. "If this is important to them, you should respect it. Family peace is worth a small sacrifice." So I sacrificed, again and again. I learned to make Margaret's grandmother's recipes exactly as instructed. I memorized how each family member took their coffee. I noted which topics were appropriate for dinner conversation and which were not. I absorbed the unspoken rules. Never question the family history, never mention it unless following Robert's father's lead, never suggest changes to any holiday ritual. The irony wasn't lost on me that my culinary degree, the achievement I'd worked double shifts to finance, had been reduced to ensuring the Yorkshire pudding was precisely the right consistency for my in-laws' approval. Last Christmas Eve, while peeling potatoes, I overheard Charlotte talking to her husband in the hallway. "Elena's so desperate to fit in. She'd probably clean the house with a toothbrush if Mother suggested it was tradition, she snickered. Poor girl doesn't realize she'll never really be one of us, her husband replied. Robert should have stuck with someone from the club. I gripped the peeler tighter, focusing on the steady motion to hold back tears. There was nothing to be gained by confrontation, I told myself. This was my family now. I just needed to try harder, be better, prove my worth. This morning, as I began preparing for my 4th Christmas with the Harringtons, Margaret handed me her mother's apron, a delicate, hand-embroidered piece I'd never seen before. You've earned this, she said, something like approval in her eyes. You've learned our ways so well. I tied it around my waist, feeling both honored and trapped. Every Christmas, I was told it was family tradition the daughter-in-law cooks, serves, and eats later. Alone. I whispered to myself as I chopped onions, the tears on my cheeks not entirely from the vapors. I believed them. I wanted to fit in, to belong. But something was different this year. As I arranged Margaret's prized silver gravy boat on the sideboard, I noticed a photograph I hadn't seen before. It showed a Christmas table from perhaps 15 years ago, with the family gathered around, including a woman I didn't recognize. She sat beside a younger Robert's brother James, smiling brightly, clearly part of the meal. I frowned, trying to make sense of it. Hadn't Margaret said this tradition spanned generations? That's James's first wife, Diane, Charlotte said, suddenly beside me. Before your time. She's eating with everyone, I said before I could stop myself. Charlotte's eyebrow arched. I suppose she is. Then she walked away, leaving me with questions I didn't dare ask. Not yet, anyway. The photograph of Diane haunted me as I continued preparing the feast. My hands worked automatically, whisking gravy, basting turkey, arranging canapes on silver trays, but my mind kept returning to that image of her seated comfortably at the family table, laughing alongside everyone else. Need any help in here? I nearly dropped the crystal bowl I was filling with cranberry sauce. Robert's sister-in-law Vanessa stood in the doorway, her designer dress perfectly unwrinkled, not a strand of her highlighted hair out of place. She'd married James 5 years ago, after his divorce from Diane. Oh, that's kind of you to offer, I said, hope rising in my chest. Maybe this year would be different. Could you help me with the… Actually, I just came to grab more champagne, Vanessa interrupted, already moving toward the wine fridge. The good stuff Margaret keeps hidden from the cousins. I watched as she extracted an expensive bottle, her manicured nails clicking against the glass. You know where everything is, I observed. Of course. I've been part of these festivities for years now. She winked. Don't worry, you're doing a fabulous job. Margaret won't stop raving about your béarnaise sauce. Just as she turned to leave, I blurted out, Will you be joining everyone for dinner? Vanessa looked at me as if I'd asked whether water was wet. Naturally. Where else would I be? The kitchen door swung shut behind her, leaving me alone with the simmering pots and the uncomfortable realization forming in my stomach. It was supposed to be a tradition, right? So why was I the only one following it? I abandoned the cranberry sauce and made my way to the small powder room off the hall, needing a moment to collect myself. Through the thin wall, I could hear voices from the living room, Margaret and Charlotte, their tones hushed but clear. Still can't believe she falls for it every year, Charlotte was saying. I almost feel bad for her. It's necessary, Margaret replied. Robert needs a wife who understands her place. After that disaster with Melissa. But making Elena think she can't eat with us? Even you have to admit that's extreme, Mother. It's a test of character. If she's going to be a Harrington, she needs to learn sacrifice. Besides, she's a cook by training. The kitchen is where she belongs. What did you tell her again? Charlotte asked, amusement in her voice. That it's an old family tradition. The newest daughter-in-law serves the family before herself. Margaret mimicked my accent slightly. She believed it without question. So eager to please. And Robert goes along with it? Robert knows what's expected. He married beneath him. The least he can do is ensure she fits our standards. Their laughter drove into me like shards of ice. I pressed my hand against my mouth to keep from making a sound, tears burning my eyes. 3 years. 3 Christmases spent cooking elaborate meals I barely got to taste, believing I was honoring a cherished family tradition when all along it had been. What? A hazing ritual? A way to put me in my place? I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back seemed suddenly like a stranger, someone who had surrendered her dignity piece by piece in exchange for approval that would never truly come. Back in the kitchen, I moved mechanically through the final dinner preparations. The turkey was golden and perfect. The sides were arranged artfully in Margaret's heirloom serving dishes. But now, everything tasted of humiliation. As I was arranging the water glasses, the front door opened, bringing a blast of cold air and laughter. Through the dining room archway, I watched as a latecomer handed her coat to the housekeeper. "Sophia, we thought you weren't coming until dessert," Margaret exclaimed, embracing the newcomer. My heart skipped. Sophia was married to Robert's youngest brother, Thomas. She had only joined the family last spring, making her the newest daughter-in-law, not me. "Changed my plans," Sophia said cheerfully. "Couldn't miss Elena's cooking. Tom says it's legendary." "Well, we're about to sit down." "Perfect timing," Margaret said, guiding Sophia toward the dining room. I nearly dropped the gravy boat. Sophia was going to eat with the family? The newest daughter-in-law? "Elena, darling, we're ready whenever you are," Margaret called out, her voice saccharine. "Everything smells divine." I approached the dining room, wiping my hands on the embroidered apron. "Sophia," I said carefully, "I'm glad you could make it." "Me too. Need any help bringing things out?" Before I could answer, Margaret smoothly interjected, No. Elena has everything under control. It's different for Sophia," she said, turning to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "She's from another culture. We wouldn't expect her to follow all our traditions right away." Sophia looked confused but allowed herself to be guided to a chair beside Thomas. Her other culture was Boston. She was from Boston. As I turned back to the kitchen, I caught Robert watching me, a flash of something, guilt? Concern? Crossing his face before he looked away. That evening, as I served course after course, I observed the dynamics with new eyes. The way Margaret subtly controlled every conversation. How Robert deferred to her in all things. The careful hierarchy at the table, with James, as oldest son, seated in the position of honor. The coded language they used to discuss people they considered beneath them. And Sophia, who had no idea what I'd been told, happily passing dishes and complimenting my cooking while seated exactly where I should have been, beside my husband. Between the main course and dessert, I slipped upstairs under the pretense of checking on something in our overnight bag. Instead, I made my way to the family library where Margaret kept the photo albums. If Diane had eaten at the table, and now Sophia was too, how many other traditions were fabrications designed just for me? The heavy album from the 1990s revealed Christmas photos with another woman, James's mother-in-law from his first marriage, seated proudly at the table. The album from the early 2000s showed Robert's old girlfriend Melissa at Christmas dinner, smiling between him and his father. My hands trembled as I carefully photographed these images with my phone. 3 years of believing I wasn't good enough to sit with my own family. 3 years of eating lukewarm food alone in the kitchen while they laughed and celebrated without me. Something inside me shifted. The perfect, accommodating daughter-in-law who had swallowed every slight and borne every indignity began to fade, replaced by a woman I had almost forgotten existed. The one who had fought her way through culinary school while working double shifts. The one who had once believed in her own worth. As I closed the album and headed back downstairs to serve the figgy pudding I'd spent 2 days preparing, a plan began forming in my mind. This would be the last Christmas I spent as their servant. It was time to change the tradition. "More wine, Father Harrington?" I asked, offering the decanter of Cabernet that had been breathing for precisely 45 minutes, exactly as Margaret had instructed over the years. "Thank you, Elena," he replied without looking up, extending his glass while continuing his conversation with James about year-end bonuses. My smile remained fixed as I moved around the table, the perfect hostess-servant. Inside, however, a storm was brewing. Each laugh that erupted around the table, each appreciative murmur over the tenderness of the beef Wellington I'd spent hours preparing, it all landed differently now. I wasn't preserving a cherished family custom. I was performing in a cruel charade designed to remind me of my supposed inferiority. "Elena, the Yorkshire puddings are divine this year," Vanessa commented, helping herself to a second one. "What did you do differently?" Before I could answer, Margaret interjected. She finally followed my grandmother's recipe properly. I've only been showing her for 3 years. She offered me a thin smile. "Persistence pays off, doesn't it, dear?" I nodded, the weight of the embroidered apron suddenly suffocating. "Your grandmother's recipe is illuminating." Robert caught my tone and glanced up, a flicker of concern crossing his face. It was the most attention he'd paid me all evening. For 3 years, I'd made excuses for his silence. He was conflict-averse. He respected his mother too much to challenge her. He truly believed this was normal. Now I wondered if he was simply a coward. "Elena, we're ready for dessert whenever you are," Charlotte called out, dabbing the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin I had pressed that morning. "Of course," I replied, retreating to the kitchen where the bread pudding waited, topped with a vanilla bean custard sauce that had taken hours to perfect. As I plated the desserts, I noticed my hands were steady. The shock and hurt had crystallized into something harder, something that burned cold rather than hot. I arranged each serving with precision, adding mint leaves and candied orange peel with tweezers, a chefly flourish I'd learned in culinary school but had abandoned in my quest to follow Margaret's exacting traditional standards. When I returned to the dining room with the dessert cart, the conversation had turned to family stories. "Remember the Christmas, when James fell through the ice on the pond?" Robert was saying, his face flushed from wine. "Dad had to fish him out with the garden rake." Everyone laughed, a private joke from a shared history that excluded me. "I'd love to see photos from past Christmases," Sophia said innocently as I placed a dessert before her. "To learn about all these traditions I'll need to follow." Charlotte nearly choked on her wine. "What traditions specifically?" I asked, placing a dessert in front of Margaret with a steady hand. Sophia shrugged. "You know, the whole works, who sits where, who carves the turkey. All those little things families are so particular about." "Yes," I said, my voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "Families can be very particular about their traditions, especially when they invent them." The clatter of silver against china stopped. 6 pairs of eyes turned to me. "Elena," Robert warned softly. I ignored him, continuing to distribute desserts with the efficiency of a chef who had catered hundreds of events. "Did you know, Sophia, that apparently in this family, it's tradition for the newest daughter-in-law to prepare the entire Christmas feast but not be allowed to eat with everyone else?" Sophia's eyes widened. "What? That's ridiculous," I supplied. "I agree. Especially since you're technically the newest daughter-in-law, yet here you sit." Margaret's face hardened. "Elena, perhaps you could bring the custard sauce." "It's on the pudding already," I interrupted, something I'd never dared to do before. "I wouldn't want to disrupt your meal with unnecessary trips to the kitchen." I know how important tradition is to the Harringtons. I watched them glance at each other uneasily. Thomas's brow furrowed as he looked between me and his mother. Even James's perpetually aloof expression had slipped, revealing confusion. With deliberate slowness, I removed the embroidered apron and draped it over the back of the empty chair, my chair, beside Robert. "I think we've had a misunderstanding," Margaret began, her voice honeyed, but her eyes sharp. "Have we?" I asked, pulling my phone from my pocket. I swiped to the gallery of photos I'd taken upstairs. "Because I'm looking at Christmas dinner, 1998. There's Diane at the table." I swiped again. "Christmas, 2005, Melissa is there too. Everyone seems to be eating together. How strange." The color drained from Margaret's face. "What is she talking about?" Thomas asked, looking around the table. "Nothing," Margaret said sharply. "Elena is just overtired from all the cooking." I watched them laugh at the table I set, eating the food I cooked, acting like I didn't exist. I said, looking directly at Robert. And something inside me snapped. Robert at least had the decency to look ashamed. Elena, we should discuss this privately.
Why?
Was I supposed to keep pretending? For how many more Christmases? My voice remained level, surprising even me. 3 years, Robert. 3 years of being told this was some sacred family tradition, when it was just a way to remind me I'm not really one of you. That's not, he began. Don't lie to me. Not anymore. I turned to the rest of the table. I overheard Margaret and Charlotte earlier. This tradition was created specifically for me, to keep me humble, to remind me I married above my station. Charlotte's face went scarlet. Father Harrington looked uncomfortable, studying his bread pudding with sudden fascination. Sophia and Thomas exchanged horrified glances. Is this true? James asked, turning to his mother. Margaret straightened her spine. Elena misunderstood. We have certain expectations for those who join this family. Standards that must be maintained. Standards that apparently only apply to me, I said. Tell me, Margaret, what exactly disqualified me from sitting at this table? Was it my accent? My background? The fact that my parents own a restaurant instead of frequenting country clubs? The silence that followed was deafening. Then, quietly, Robert spoke. Mom thought it would be good for you. Help you understand our way of life. I stared at him. This man I had loved. This stranger who had allowed his mother to humiliate me year after year. And you agreed with her? He wouldn't meet my eyes. I thought you understood. That it was temporary until you adjusted. Adjusted to what? Being treated as staff in my own family? No one answered. The beautiful bread pudding sat untouched, steam no longer rising from its perfect surface. I think I finally understand your family traditions perfectly, I said, reaching for my coat. Merry Christmas. Enjoy your dessert. I walked out of the dining room, past the gleaming Christmas tree with its color-coordinated ornaments, through the front door, and into the cold December night, leaving nothing but silence and the lingering scent of vanilla custard behind me. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I walked away from the Harrington estate. I had no destination in mind, just away, anywhere but there. My phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket. Robert, no doubt, trying to smooth things over, to coax me back into the role I'd played for 3 years. I silenced it without looking. 2 blocks down, I found a small park with a gazebo strung with Christmas lights. I sat on a cold bench, my breath fogging in the winter air, and finally allowed myself to cry, not delicate tears, but gut-wrenching sobs that left me gasping. For my dignity, for my wasted efforts, for the love I thought I had. When the tears finally subsided, I pulled out my phone. 12 missed calls from Robert, 3 from Charlotte, and surprisingly, 1 from Sophia. I ignored them all and instead opened my contacts, scrolling to a name I'd never called before. Layla Harrington Cohen. Robert's cousin was something of a family ghost, mentioned only in whispers, her name often accompanied by tight smiles and quick subject changes. I'd met her only once, at our wedding, where she'd hugged me warmly and slipped me her number. If you ever need a reality check about this family, she'd whispered, call me. At the time, I'd thought she was just being dramatic. Now I knew better. The phone rang 3 times before she answered. Hello. Her voice was cautious. Layla? It's Elena, Robert's wife. My voice sounded strange, hollow. Elena? Surprise colored her tone. Is everything okay? It's Christmas. I just walked out on the Harrington Christmas dinner. There's a pause, then a low chuckle. Well, welcome to the club. Where are you? 20 minutes later, a sleek black SUV pulled up beside the park. Layla stepped out, a striking woman in her 40s with the unmistakable Harrington jawline but none of the coldness. She took one look at me and opened her arms. I hadn't realized how much I needed that hug. My apartment is just 15 minutes away, she said, guiding me to her car. Hot chocolate, a generous splash of bourbon, and the unvarnished truth about your in-laws. Sound good? Layla's apartment was everything the Harrington home was not. Warm, eclectic, filled with art and books and photographs from her travels. A menorah stood in one window, a small Christmas tree in another. My husband's Jewish. I was raised Christian, she explained, catching my glance. We honor both, much to Margaret's eternal dismay. As she prepared the promised hot chocolate in a kitchen that showed signs of actual use rather than just showcase perfection, Layla shared her story. I was the family rebel, she said, adding cinnamon to the simmering milk. Went to public school instead of Prescott Academy. Studied anthropology instead of something practical. But the real sin was falling in love with David. Because he's Jewish? I asked. Layla smiled sadly. That was part of it, but mostly because he's the son of immigrants, worked his way through college, and worst of all, teaches at a community college. She handed me a steaming mug. The Harringtons don't mind diversity as long as it comes with a right pedigree and bank account. I told her everything, the 3 years of Christmas traditions, the revelation about the photographs, the confrontation at dinner. With each detail, Layla's expression hardened. If tradition is just a lie they tell to control me, then maybe it's time I rewrite it, I said finally, staring into my mug. That's exactly what they fear most, Layla replied, curling up in her armchair. The Harringtons run on control. It's their currency, their religion. Margaret especially. What did they do to you? Layla's smile was razor sharp. Tried to break up my engagement. When that failed, they attempted to bribe David to leave me. When that failed, they staged an intervention complete with a dossier on why I was ruining my life. She took a sip of her drink. I walked out just like you did tonight. Difference is, I stayed gone for 5 years. 5 years. I gasped. Best thing I could have done. When I finally reconnected, it was on my terms. Margaret still doesn't approve, but she knows I won't tolerate her games. My phone buzzed again. Robert's 23rd call. I sent it to voicemail. He was part of it, I said, my voice catching. He knew what they were doing to me and went along with it. Layla's expression softened. The Harrington men are complicated. Weak in ways that matter, strong only when it's convenient. They're raised to defer to Margaret, to value family reputation above all. Some break free. Most don't. I thought I knew him, I whispered. Maybe you do. Maybe this is who he really is. The truth of that settled heavily between us. What happens now? I asked. Layla refilled our mugs, adding an extra splash of bourbon. That depends on what you want. Divorce. Reconciliation with strict new boundaries. Something in between. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I know I can't go back to being invisible. Good. Hold on to that. Layla pulled out her phone. Meanwhile, I have an idea for a little education for the family. They've spent years crafting an image, controlling the narrative. What if we flip the script? How? Social media is Margaret's weak spot. Nothing terrifies her more than public exposure. Layla's eyes gleamed with mischief. She can handle private rebellion. She just rewrites the family history. But public embarrassment? That's her kryptonite. I straightened, something like hope flickering in my chest. I'm listening. You're a chef, right? What if you documented next year's Christmas preparation? A behind-the-scenes look at what it takes to create the perfect Harrington holiday. The traditions, the expectations. She raised an eyebrow. The reality. They'd never allow it. Who said anything about asking permission? Layla grinned. Sometimes forgiveness is easier, especially when you have leverage. Leverage. Those photos you took of past Christmases. The ones that prove their tradition is a lie. She leaned forward. But we have 11 months to plan. For now, you need to decide if you're going home tonight. Home. The word felt hollow. Was the house I shared with Robert really home? Had it ever been? I can't face him yet, I said. I need time to think. My guest room is yours as long as you need it. David's at his parents' until tomorrow, so it's just us. For the first time since walking out of the Harrington house, I felt myself breathe fully. Layla understood what I'd been through because she'd lived her own version of it. They're going to try to make you doubt yourself, she warned, squeezing my hand. Stand firm. What they did was cruel and deliberate. You didn't imagine it, and you didn't deserve it. As we talked late into the night, a plan began taking shape, not just for Christmas, but for reclaiming my voice, my dignity, and my place at whatever table I chose to sit at. Margaret had her traditions. It was time to create some of my own. 1 year later, I stood in the Harrington kitchen, adjusting my wireless earbuds and checking the angle of my phone propped discreetly against the copper kettle. Perfect. It captured both the island where I was working and the door to the dining room. Test, test, I whispered. Can you hear me, Layla? Loud and clear, came the response in my ear. And your followers are already tuning in. 300 and counting. I smiled, slicing chestnuts with practiced precision. In the 11 months since last Christmas, much had changed. After 3 days at Layla's apartment, I had returned home to find Robert alternating between defensive justification and desperate apologies. We'd spent weeks in couples therapy, unpacking years of enabling behavior and misplaced loyalty. We'd almost divorced in April. We'd recommitted in June, but with clear boundaries. No more unsupervised holidays with his family, no more quiet acceptance of Margaret's manipulations, and most importantly, Robert had to stand up for me and for himself. The Instagram account had been Layla's idea, The Real Holiday Table, where I documented my journey as a chef reclaiming my passion for food after years of cooking to please others. I shared memories of my parents' Ukrainian Christmas dishes alongside new creations. I never mentioned the Harringtons by name, but I occasionally alluded to traditional family dynamics that had stifled my creativity. The account had resonated, especially with women who'd felt marginalized in their own family structures. By December, I had over 20,000 followers, many eagerly awaiting my promised Christmas Eve live stream. What they didn't know was that today's stream had a very specific audience in mind. Elena? Mother wants to know when the canapes will be ready. Charlotte appeared in the doorway, her voice notably more respectful than it had been a year ago. 10 minutes, I replied cheerfully. I'm just finishing the plating. Charlotte lingered, watching me work. You seem different this year. I am different. After our confrontation last Christmas, the family had closed ranks, initially excluding me entirely from gatherings while painting me as emotionally unstable to extended family. But Layla had countered by hosting her own Easter celebration, inviting cousins, and sharing the truth. Slowly, cracks had formed in Margaret's carefully constructed narrative. This Christmas invitation had come with obvious reluctance, a necessary concession after Robert had threatened to skip the holiday entirely if I wasn't welcomed properly. Everyone's waiting in the living room, Charlotte said finally, turning to leave. Perfect timing, I murmured, adjusting my phone one last time. Let the show begin. The living room fell silent as I entered with a tray of immaculately presented appetizers, not Margaret's traditional cheese puffs, but my own creation, delicate puff pastry stars filled with caramelized onion, goat cheese, and thyme. These look different, Margaret observed, her smile tight. A new tradition, I replied, my voice steady. I hope you enjoy them. Robert crossed the room to stand beside me, his hand resting supportively on my back. This small gesture, public solidarity, was still new enough to feel like victory. I've been looking forward to Elena's cooking all month, Sophia piped up, selecting an appetizer. Her Instagram recipes are amazing. Margaret's eyebrows shot up. Instagram. Oh yes, Sophia continued innocently. Elena has quite the following. Her story about family holiday traditions went viral last month. She bit into the pastry. Oh my God, these are incredible. I watched Margaret's face carefully as she absorbed this information. Her eyes narrowed slightly, calculating, assessing the potential damage to her carefully cultivated image. How modern, she said finally. Though I've always believed family matters should remain private. I believe in authenticity, I replied. In fact, I'm sharing today's preparations with my followers. The theme is creating new traditions. I could almost hear the gears turning in Margaret's head as she processed the implications. What had I already shared? What might I reveal? Her desire to preserve appearances warred visibly with her instinct to assert control. Dinner preparations proceeded with an undercurrent of tension. Margaret hovered more than usual, inserting suggestions that sounded like commands. I accepted some, politely declined others, narrating the process to my invisible audience. And now we're preparing the table. This year, with settings for everyone. I explained cheerfully into my earbuds as I arranged the fine china. In some families, everyone participates in the meal they've helped create, a true celebration of togetherness. Margaret's hands froze in the act of adjusting a crystal glass. "Elena," she said quietly, "perhaps we could speak privately." I followed her into the hallway, where she turned to face me with cold fury. "Whatever game you're playing stops now," she hissed. "This family has welcomed you." "Has it?" I interrupted calmly. "Last year, you had me cooking in the kitchen while everyone else ate. You invented a false tradition to exclude me because you thought I wasn't good enough. That's not. I have the recordings, Margaret, from last year. Your conversation with Charlotte about keeping me in my place. Would you like me to play it for you? Or perhaps share it with my followers?" The color drained from her face. "You wouldn't dare." "I don't want to," I said truthfully. "What I want is simple. Respect. Not just for me, but for anyone who joins this family in the future." For the first time since I'd known her, Margaret Harrington looked uncertain. They expected me to serve them. I served them the truth instead. Robert appeared at the end of the hall. "Everything okay?" I smiled. "Your mother and I are just discussing new traditions. Aren't we, Margaret?" Dinner that evening was a study in controlled tension. I sat beside Robert, Sophia across from me, with Margaret at the head of the table, her fingers white around her wine glass. The conversation remained artificially light, everyone careful to include me. James asked about my parents' restaurant. Father Harrington complimented my cooking repeatedly, almost desperately. As we finished the main course, I discreetly ended the live stream with a promise to my followers to return for dessert. Then I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table, the screen visible to everyone. "I've been documenting Harrington Christmases," I said conversationally. "Last year, this year, the differences are remarkable." I scrolled slowly through the photos, me standing in the kitchen alone last year, this year's place setting with my name card, last year's images of the family eating without me, this year's unified table. "What exactly are you planning to do with those?" Charlotte asked, her voice strained. I looked each of them in the eye before landing on Margaret. "That depends entirely on the future, on whether certain traditions remain firmly in the past." No one spoke. The message was clear. "Now," I said, rising to my feet, "who's ready for dessert? I've prepared something special." "Is the table setting all right? Should I move the centerpiece?" Robert asked, adjusting the arrangement of pine branches and red candles for the third time. I smiled, watching him fuss over details he wouldn't have noticed a year ago. "It's perfect. Leave it." It was New Year's Eve, exactly 1 week after the Christmas showdown at the Harrington estate. Our modest home, the one Margaret had once dismissed as charming but transitional, glowed with warmth. Fairy lights twinkled along the mantel. The air smelled of mulled wine and the Ukrainian honey cake my mother had taught me to make when I was 12. "What time is everyone arriving?" Robert asked, straightening cutlery that was already perfectly aligned.
7.
"And stop fidgeting. They're not coming to inspect us." I caught his hand and squeezed it gently. This isn't a Harrington event. There's no rubric for success. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly.
"Sorry."
Old habits. The Christmas dinner at his parents' house had ended with a fragile truce. After my ultimatum, Margaret had retreated into rigid politeness. The dessert, my pear and walnut tart with cardamom cream, had been consumed in uncomfortable silence. But we'd all sat at the same table, and when we left, Robert had promised his mother we'd discuss things after the holidays. That discussion was scheduled for next week. I wasn't looking forward to it, but I was no longer afraid of it either. The doorbell rang at 6:55. Layla and David arrived first, bearing a bottle of champagne and a platter of rugula. "Let me guess, Margaret is already practicing her wounded dignity speech for your meeting," Layla said, hanging her coat. "Undoubtedly," I replied, accepting the pastries. "But I have Robert's promise that we're a united front." Layla's eyebrows rose slightly as she glanced at her cousin. Robert met her gaze steadily. "We are," he confirmed. I've spent too many years letting her control everything. That stops now. David clapped him on the shoulder. Better late than never, my friend. The doorbell rang again. This time it was Sophia and Thomas, looking slightly nervous but smiling. We brought wine, Sophia said, handing me a bottle. And family gossip. Charlotte is furious that we're here tonight. I welcomed them with genuine warmth. After Christmas dinner, Sophia had sought me out privately to apologize for her unwitting role in last year's debacle. Learning the truth had horrified her, and she'd spent the year quietly distancing herself from Margaret's influence. I never wanted to be the proved daughter-in-law at someone else's expense, she'd told me. By 7:30, my living room held a collection of Harrington outcasts and rebels. James's ex-wife Diane and her new husband. Two cousins who'd fallen from grace by choosing careers in public service rather than finance. Even Robert's childhood friend who'd been deemed unsuitable company after coming out as gay in college. And most surprisingly, Father Harrington himself had appeared at our door, looking uncomfortable but determined. I owe you an apology, Elena, he'd said stiffly in the hallway. I allowed this situation to continue when I should have spoken up. His presence had shocked Robert speechless. In all his 40 years, he'd never seen his father defy Margaret so directly. As we gathered around our dining table, mismatched chairs pulled from every room to accommodate everyone, I took a moment to absorb the scene. Here was a different kind of family, formed not by obligation or tradition but by choice and understanding. I'd like to propose a toast, I said, raising my glass. To new beginnings and to taking our rightful places at the table, whatever table that may be. Here, here, came the response, glasses clinking around the circle. As the evening progressed, the initial awkwardness melted away. Stories were shared, not the carefully curated Harrington mythology, but honest accounts of rebellion and reconciliation. Laughter flowed freely. No one monitored anyone else's wine consumption or corrected their grammar or subtly undermined their achievements. This year, I ate first, I said quietly to Layla as we carried plates to the kitchen after the main course. And I wasn't alone. She smiled, bumping my shoulder with hers. You created this, Elena. Own it. Later, as midnight approached, I found myself standing beside the window, watching snow begin to fall. Robert joined me, slipping his arm around my waist. Thank you, he said softly. For what? For not giving up on me. For showing me what courage looks like. He pressed his forehead against mine. For teaching me what family should be. I leaned into him, acknowledging the gratitude, but also the work still ahead. Our marriage had survived, but it had transformed into something new, something stronger, but also more demanding of both of us. In the background, our guests were laughing at something David had said. Father Harrington's deep chuckle mingled with Diane's musical laugh. Former outsiders, now finding connection. 10 seconds to midnight. Sophia called out, champagne bottle ready. We rejoined the circle, hands clasped, counting down together. As the clock struck 12 and cheers erupted, I caught Father Harrington watching me with something like respect in his eyes. He raised his glass slightly in my direction, a private acknowledgement. Later that night, after our guests had departed and Robert had fallen asleep, I sat at our kitchen table with a final glass of wine. My phone showed dozens of notifications, comments and messages from followers who'd watched my Christmas live stream and resonated with its unspoken message about family dynamics and self-worth. One comment in particular caught my eye. You inspired me to stand up for myself at our family dinner. First time in 15 years, I didn't spend the holiday feeling invisible. Thank you. I smiled, thinking of the meeting with Margaret looming next week. There would be resistance, attempts to re-establish control, perhaps even ultimatums of her own. But the days of silent accommodation were over. The table had been reset. The menu had changed. This was my tradition now. Truth served without apology, dignity as the main course, and always, always a place for everyone who deserved to be there. I raised my glass to my reflection in the window. Bon appetit, I whispered to the woman looking back at me, the one who had finally found her voice.